Hi, and welcome to the Blurry Turtle Podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by magnesium. What even is that? So, more chaos, which is becoming a theme at Wimbledon. I'm enjoying it, even if it's making some of the predictions rough. Top section of the draw has a lot, bottom section of the draw has more. Sabalenka did well to outlast Puskova. Puskova made her play a lot of tennis. That's probably a good prep match for Sabalenka. If you breeze through the early draw, when you get to the tough sections, it's tough. So if you've had to play a lot of baseline rallies, it just puts you in a pretty good rhythm. Practice is good, hitting partners are good, but there's nothing like match play to get sharp. So she's looking good here. Big boost to her with Raducanu taking out Vondrousova. Vondrousova had just beaten Sabalenka. So, that's definitely a matchup she was looking to avoid. Vondrousova hits a lot of low balls, a lot of slices, stuff that, bothers Sabalenka, but she can get a bit impatient, as we saw in Roland Garros at the finals. So this is an easier matchup for her. She beat Raducanu last time they played. Raducanu hits the ball really solid, but I felt like last match was a stylistic benefit for her. She's really technically sound, and all the skill shots that Vondrousova plays are not really hyper aggressive. They're just something that you need to make the right contact. You need to have the right technique to combat. And Raducanu does. That's one of the things that helped her when she was on that run at the US Open. A lot of players were just testing her technical skills and seeing, can she hit a high backhand? How does she deal with a slice? How's her forehand on the run? And these shots are good. With her, it's just really a fitness issue, and sometimes a focus issue. She played a perfect match, though. One thing I thought she did great is stay home when Vondrousova had forehands. Raducanu just basically gave up the forehand down the line and stayed on the cross-court forehand of Vondrousova. So every time Vondrousova went there, Raducanu made her pay with a good backhand cross-court. It really, really made it tough for Vondrousova to create offense. And then Raducanu's serve was a bit better. It seemed like she was just able to lean into shots a bit more, and Marketa started hitting the ball a bit lighter, a bit more tentatively. And at the end of the game, when you have scoreboard pressure, that doesn't really work. So great win by Raducanu. She did well to serve the ball wide to Vondrousova's forehand a lot, because Vondrousova tends to block or chip that back. Just, between Raducanu and her team, they just really had a great game plan, and I think other coaches are going to kind of follow that when they have to play Vondrousova in the future. I do expect Sabalenka to win with the crowd support and the level that Raducanu is playing. It's probably going to be a close match. I could see something like, 7-5, 6-4. I think Sabalenka's just a bit stronger physically, and, she hits the ball harder than Raducanu does. Emma had a power differential against Vondrousova that was very noticeable, and, I think it's gone here. So I think Sabalenka wins that in two very close sets. The upsets on the table, as well as Raducanu played, her ceiling is Grand Slam champion. So, it'll be good to watch that one. You can tell already I'm trying to cover my ass because of how ridiculous some of the results have been. I wouldn't say ridiculous in a bad way, just, very surprising. I just got finished watching Cilic beat Draper. Incredible stuff from him, but we haven't really seen that level of tennis from him for the last 3-4 months. So, just turning into a great tournament. Mertens and Svitolina have played a handful of times. Svitolina just beat her 7-5, 6-4 in Bad Homburg. Conditions there are a little faster, so I think Mertens will do, about as well, maybe a little better here. Mertens is serving well. Just had a tough match with Ann Lee, but she kind of won it running away. So, it is possible to make improvements after you just played somebody and the match was close. You'll know what things you did wrong. You'll know what to cut out. And for Svitolina, she'll be coming in with the same game plan, which can sometimes give you a little problem solving, when the match is tight, which I think it will be. Svitolina played well last round. I think she might just be a little more aggressive with her ground strokes than Mertens. Mertens plays a lot of skill shots, a lot of slices, redirects her backhand well, but I think Svitolina is more looking to hit the ball hard a lot of the time, and that really will give you a bonus on grass. So I think Svitolina wins a close one there. Sierra might have pulled off, the upset of the day. It's hard to pick one out among all of them. Bolter just kind of lost her timing and confidence as the match went on. Sierra, like I said, she plays really solid. The base is there for her to be a top 20 player. She hits the ball really hard. She's physically fit. She does serve, I wouldn't say aggressively as far as like the location, but she serves the ball hard and she lands a good percentage of first serves. Bolter had kind of the opposite experience. She had 14 double faults in 14 service games, which is, it's a big boost to give a player like Sierra in particular, because Sierra's really looking to outlast you. She's looking to hit the ball solid and, make you work and put pressure. So if you're putting pressure on yourself, it means you're having to win a lot of baseline rallies. And since Bolter's a very aggressive player in terms of shot selection, it just kind of steamrolled, and Sierra, she has no baggage at this level. She has no, I missed this big opportunity. Everything for her is just a bonus right now. So she's playing free, and she has that belief, and they talk a lot about nerves when they're announcing in these big moments, but I think the nerves are not there when your tennis is solid. I think the nerves are not there when your technical skills are there and you've trained them your whole life. So, it's good to see the next generation not really having holes in their game and thriving on all surfaces. I think Sierra can possibly outlast Buksha. Buksha played as well as I've ever seen her last round, though, against Vekic. She really just went for constant offense. I would say her and Zakharova have had the, most aggressive shot selection of anyone in the tournament so far. She just really is ripping her forehand cross-court efficiently, not really backing off on the serves, a couple double faults here and there, but they don't really matter when your overall, aggression is landing. I think the problem for her here is that, you get a big boost against Vekic because she doesn't move well. She's not really a good defender at all. She can struggle with confidence. It's just going to be a much different match, I think, against Sierra, who, isn't going to give you many free points, isn't going to worry if she's down in the scoreline. She's had some tough matches this year. She's had some tough losses. It's, it hasn't made her fold up, I would say, in those moments. So I think overall Sierra's a little more consistent. We're getting into that section of the week, where the grass is getting a little bit slower. Rain has slowed it down a little bit. I think Sierra wins in 3. It could really go either way here. This is two players not expected to be in this round, and both of them have nothing to lose, so that should be a really, really good match. Siegemund pulled off a big upset. It kind of got overlooked with all the other ones, but beating Fernandez is, it's a frequent occurrence that Fernandez loses to some players ranked lower than her, but still hard to do, Siegemund played well. She'll play hard again. She really never gives up no matter what. Very tenacious player. Some controversy out there, but, that tends to happen when you're fighting really hard. You get a bit ahead of yourself sometimes in terms of your behavior. Keys really surprised me by beating Danilovic that easily. I think it shows a good level from her, and she should probably smoke Siegemund. I don't think Laura really has the offense to score on Keys that Danilovic does, and the defense is obviously better, but there's not a lot of defense you can play the way Keys hits the ball. So I think Keys wins that in 2. Rakimova, huge upset for her. She's having, I think she had one of the worst seasons and a half that I've seen from a player. It's easy to forget that she's still young. I think she's 22 right now. Beating Paolini at a major is incredible. She's not the best on grass, but that's a big win. And she did it in a difficult way. Rakimova was down a set and a break, had to grind back, several times and just really played solid. That's been her MO out there, is just to really hit the ball solid and maintain cross-court patterns, and it's working for her right now. She has an interesting spot here against Noskova. Linda, at her best, when she's fresh, she's going to hit the ball too hard for Rakimova. Rakimova's big problem is that she doesn't really serve that well. It tends to just kind of slice in the second serve, just roll it in, and Noskova's going to punish that. The hope for Rakhimova here is that Noskova looked tired in the second and third set against Eva Lise. A few points in the opposite direction, and Lise would have won that match. It really was, a bit lucky that Noskova got through. A day of rest, some training, fluids, whatever else they do, she can definitely get it back together. I would expect her to win the early exchanges. And then the question is, how much does she have left in the tank? Rakhimova is a little better than Eva Lise right now. Hits the ball harder, better form. I expect Noskova in 2, if she can run away with it, or if not, I would take Rakhimova in 3. Gaufi, every round there's just an incredible result. 2 weeks ago, beating Haddad Maia, I would say it's pretty simple. She does it to herself. She's been very error prone, very visible slump. She played well though the last couple of weeks. She got her game together on grass. So for Gaufi to do that, very impressive. And again, it wasn't easy. She was, they were going back and forth on serve. There were a handful of breaks in the first set. Gaufi, a player like Dolehide who, if she hits her first serve, anything short you give back, she's just going to clean up the point. She has a really big forehand, great power, not bad movement either. For her, it's really just about decision making. When she's in trouble, she'll swing big anyway. The forehand can go wide right kind of often. When she goes down the line, she can lose a little length on the backhand. Still a great win. I do think she has a chance against Anisimova. Not a great one. I was a bit surprised, actually, that Zarazua won so many games against Amanda. She broke a handful of times. It really felt like if Zarazua had a first serve, a stronger first serve, that Amanda would have been probably in a third set there. Still a good win. Sometimes the easy ones are difficult because you're supposed to win, so you're playing a little more careful, or you're in a rush. I didn't catch a ton of the match, so I'm not entirely sure what the issue was. I shouldn't admit that, but I did, and I will. Yeah, I'm always gonna say if I just didn't catch a match, it's pretty impossible to watch all of them. I try to cycle through, catch a game or two of each, at the key moments, and then check stats. But the ones that I think are gonna be a blowout, I tend not to check. Like I saw the last game of Sinner today. He looked good. I think Anisimova's offense is a little too strong for Gaufi's defense. It should be a shootout. I don't think Gaufi has won any matches of this caliber yet. And Haddad Maia is a good win, but doesn't really have the offensive consistency that Amanda does. So I think Amanda wins, even if it's 2 or 3. I think she just gets through there. I feel like she goes very deep in this draw the way she's playing. Not a lot of pressure on her either. Parry with a great win. She just started scoring with her slice, and it really was the match decider. Schneider started making a lot of errors. Really never stopped. It's kind of funny to see her play without a leg wrap. I actually heard from someone that it's not always because of an injury. Sometimes it's just superstition. And I kind of wish that she had it on, because now that she's lost without it, you might see it again for the rest of the season. Parry's playing well. It was a gift of a win, really, in the second set, but she is playing some good tennis right now. So her against Cartel is, I think it's even. Cartel has more power, a more traditional offense for grass, but Parry's slices and defending are really strong. If you had Cartel against Schneider, you'd be expecting Schneider to win. So the fact that she's outdone a stronger offense, gives me hope. The positives for Cartel is that her footwork is a lot more proactive than Schneider. Schneider was kind of late moving to a lot of the slices. Kind of had a tough time lifting the ball up. Cartel has a much more traditional swing, I'd say. So she'll be able to deal with that a little better. Parry's not really without offense herself. She can serves well from the deuce court down the tee. Pretty strong forehand. I tend to think that Parry wins when she's the bigger forehand on court. I don't think she is here, so I think it could be very, very close. The home crowd could be a factor here. I like Parry, but I am a little biased. I enjoy watching the one hand. It's hard for me to watch a player with really good technical skills on a win streak and think that they're going to lose. You just expect that they continue. I watch Musetti play and I go, oh, this guy is, he's going to the quarters, he's going to the semifinals, but the beautiful swings don't always get it done. So I do like Parry to win that in 3, but it could go the other way. Pavlyuchenkova with a good win against Kruger. That was close pretty much the whole time. Just more consistent ball hitting for Pavs. She just didn't really go for too much, just kept driving the ball deep in the court and, waiting for Kruger's defense to break down, which at this point it still will. Good signs for Kruger that she's playing consistently. This whole season has been solid tennis from her, which was not really there. Last season was, a week good, 2 weeks bad, a week good, etc. So, good signs from her for especially going into the hard court season. Most of the Americans tend to play a lot more comfortably in North America. So, good win. Pavs has actually never beaten Osaka or hasn't beaten her in any of the recent meetings. But the meetings aren't really that recent. It was, in 2021, 2020, 2019, really the years where Osaka was at her best. So I think this is going to be close. Osaka beat Siniakova 3-2, but Siniakova had a really inconsistent day. I would say both players did. They just kind of, they landed a couple big shots and then clipped one into the net that they didn't really need to. I'm sure they did need to. When you're hitting the ball big, at home watching on TV, I'm wondering why people missed, but in real time you're rushed. You're not getting a full swing. The ball's taking strange bounces, so I'll give them some excuses. Osaka's serve, I think, should be the difference against Pavlyuchenkova, but this is a player who's really playing consistently, and Osaka's undoing lately has been, errors against baseliners who can keep the ball in play. So, one thing I would say that is the draw has opened up here. So, Osaka and her team, I don't know if that is going to give them extra pressure or let her play a little more free, knowing that she's not really running into any huge names here. So, I think this should be close. Given how close Kruger got with just pure offense, I think Osaka wins in 2 or 3. But, it should be a tough match for her. Andreeva Baptiste is tricky. Andreeva should be favored here, but hasn't really done a lot on grass yet. I keep thinking of that match with Noskova where she just really didn't look like she had time. And, if you're struggling with Noskova's pace, Baptiste is a similar equation. Maybe a bit more athletic, too. Baptiste, not the best defender, not always digging in, but she's going to put more balls in play. She has some solid slices. She's going to make gets. She can hustle when she needs to. Better serving than Noskova. From the baseline on offense, I'd say she's less dangerous, but, the rest of her game is similar. So, she was able to grind past Mboko, who's continues to be one of the most exciting players. She had some knee wraps on both knees, which is a little bit scary. I don't know if that was for, in case you slide on grass, if there were some cuts from an earlier round or something, but, hopefully she remains healthy, as her career develops. Baptiste should win a set here. I really, I don't see where Andreeva hits her off the court. The style of hitting that Andreeva has doesn't really get the ball to slide a ton on grass. Just feels close. You can probably hear it in my voice. I think Baptiste is capable of pulling this upset, but it just feels like she's had some tough matches against grinders at times, And Boko almost got there, and Andreeva is definitely more consistent than her. Similar movement also. So I think Andreeva can win that in 3. Krejcikova, 3 sets was not as bad as it looked. On paper, it looked like she got a bit lucky. she just kind of threw away the second set. Once she went down a break, she just hit forehands into the tape or long. It wasn't really solid play from her. And I think that's kind of been a hallmark of her runs. She's not that active on tour, so she just goes for her shots, and there are periods where she misses, but not enough to really crash her out of the tournament. I do think she loses this round. Navarro's defense is her best attribute right now on grass. She's really slicing the ball well on her backhand side. And it's another player who, when you finally hit through their defense or you relinquish control, they have offense. Navarro can serve big when she needs to. Reminds me a little bit of early Sakkari, not in terms of shot style, but, Sakkari would grind you down, wind up in a third set, and then she did still have the ability to hit some big first serves, which you don't really want against a defensive baseliner. So, I think Navarro will expose the errors there and just be a little more consistent on defense and offense than Dolehide was. Dolehide was looking to hit big, and she just wasn't the bigger hitter overall. So I like Navarro to win in 3 there. Krejcikova is still very good. Still hard to, if you give her control, she's going to score on you. But I do think fitness-wise, Navarro's just on another level right now. And, she should win. Sonmez, big surprise for me there. Very close match. 7-5, 7-5 means it probably could have gone either way. Just a little surprised that Wang's level would drop a little bit after playing so well for a couple matches in a row. It wasn't a huge drop, but it wasn't the same player really that I've seen in the last couple of rounds. Sonmez has another huge offensive test here. I think it's hard for me to say she wins this one. Alexandrova is way more consistent, way more well regarded on tour than Wang, as far as offensive production. And Alexandrova is a player who, when she plays well, the first few rounds at a tournament, you can expect her to play well the whole week. Grass is working for her game right now. She shut Lamens down. Should be close, I think, with Sonmez, because she has really good technical skills, very, very solid backhand, good movement, a decent serve for a shorter player. Overall, I would say, in her weight class, if they did tennis by weight class, Sonmez could be, battling for the second week of Grand Slams. But Alexandrova hits the ball a bit bigger, I think, and the serve should be a boost. So I think she wins that in 2 or 3. Bencic and Giacomo was wildly entertaining. It did always feel like Bencic would wear her down. Bencic's ability to make you move and to hug the baseline while still trading power is useful against a big hitter like Giacomo. I will say Elsa's backhand down the line is ridiculously impressive. It's almost like she gets her movement exposed and winds up in such bad positions that she's developed the perfect shots to score from them. She's 3 feet outside the doubles line, hitting the ball down the line and accurately. You can see her guiding the shot in. It's not even like a desperation play. So, really bright points from her game. And she does seem to be improving her fitness and strength. So, for a taller player, that's a big key. I don't think she'll have a bad hard court season either, as well as she serves. Bencic against another big offense here. Elisabetta Cocciaretto is playing, the best tennis I've ever seen her play. Again, it wasn't Pegula losing. It was her just getting shocked by the constant barrage of offense. And she did it to Katie Volynets too. She was in trouble second set. I think she was down a break early in the set, or faced some break points. But, for someone to come back like that, it, really backs up the initial upset. I think she can beat Bencic. Slightly better mover than Elsa. Not really as big of a server, so it is going to be tricky. I could see that going to 3. The letdown she had early in the second set is one that would cost her against Bencic. Bencic's offense is a bit better. And Bencic is pretty good at trading power, so if she's getting to the ball, and that's a big if, I think she can win in 3. I don't think she's the favorite, though, honestly. I think Kochioreda has shown a level so far that, is a little better than what Bencic has. And Bencic just seemed a little rusty, heading into this tournament and so far this week. Do you just expect that to wind up in a third, though? And then, whoever rises to the occasion should get there. I guess Bencic, has the experience. I don't think they've played before. So just, a tough match. Swiatek, pretty surprised she lost the first set, but, I guess she's not dominant on grass, even though she did pick up a title. Made the finals. Yeah, I like Collins to beat her here. Swiatek was really good after dropping the first set. She went into full ego mode, just locked down everything, just hit constant winners, nonstop pressure. I just think she still can get rushed on fast surfaces, and Collins is the player to do that. If Swiatek doesn't serve well, Collins is going to batter away. I don't really know how much longer Collins' fitness is going to hang on tour. She's talked about retiring. She does look a little bit, less motivated and focused on tour, a little slower at times. Not, to the detriment of her results. I just think that, these high-profile matches used to be something that you could guarantee she balled out in, and now it's kind of like, when she wins, it's a big win. She did just beat Swiatek on clay, though, so she'll feel confident in this matchup and also be comfortable, I think, with the patterns, of shots. So I like Collins there. I think she wins. She could go down in the same, lopsided 3 sets, if she gets tired. But I think she'll control the game in the early points, and I think Swiatek can still get a bit frustrated on grass. So I like Collins there. Towson hung on. The books were right on that one. Kalinskaya did, put up a good fight, and Towson almost gassed out. It's probably the end of the road here for her against Rybakina. Rybakina's serving too well. I would expect Towson to crash out because of stamina issues. She's had trouble in the second sets. Against Rybakina, though, she'll be fine in that regard, but Rybakina's just serving really well right now. I don't see too many players beating her. Maybe she has trouble with Samsonova when if it happens. It's fitting, I guess, that the two big offenses would go against each other. You might see, an overtime set because they just both can they can hit the ball right past the other player. I just think Rybakina is more efficient on serve right now than anyone in the tournament. So, I like her to win that in 2. Kasatkina Begu was a, tough one to match for the announcers. They were yelling at Kasatkina to come to net. Might be a good point. I don't really know if she's comfortable there. And given her results this year, it kind of felt like she just wanted to ensure that she got the point. Forget the proper way to play. Forget what might be technically right. Just make sure you get your racket on the next ball and just grind an opponent down who you can grind down. And that is how she played the match. She just extended points, kept running, and when Begu had highlights, Kasatkina just shook her head and played the next point, so good win for her there. I don't think she does much with Samsonova. Samsonova's offense is on another level right now. If Kasatkina is giving her time and playing deep behind the baseline like she did against Begu, she'll get smoked, and that's probably what goes on here. Buzas Monero, I thought she might push things there. Didn't realize she would win. I really think she played great there. Just hit her. It might actually be Monero, but the announcers have been kind of skirting between the two. I don't see an accent mark, but I don't know if ESPN Bet does that. Or this might just be ESPN. Sorry. Betting is bad, guys. Don't do it. Yastremska, the win against Goff was great. This one was maybe more epic. Zakharova just hit constant offense. For a young player to be already playing that aggressively and for her percentages to be going up with that approach is really impressive. I think, On hard court, it's going to be really hard to beat her. She'll have more time on clay. Her serve is aggressive, but, it's effective when it lands. So, the double faults are a problem now, but I think as she gets stronger, which she will, it's clear she's training pretty hard. She's got a little Nadal routine where she practices the forehand, backhand, and then does a little shuffle between every single point. So, her team is clearly working on ways to get her more machine-like, and, that can help manage a player's emotional swings too when they're an aggressive player. So her team seems like they're doing a good job with her. She really could have won that match. Yastremska was lucky to hang on, really. She was down in the second set too. Zakharova had, some leads in the tiebreaker. Just a slugfest from the both of them. I think I like Buzis Monero in this match, actually. Yastremska did make a lot of errors today against Zakharova. Monero's not going to hit the ball as aggressively, target-wise, but she hits the ball hard, and she didn't really give Kenin much. She was able to serve out the match when she needed to. Monero's a player like Sierra, who I just don't see a hole in her game right now. She's very comfortable in the court in all aspects, and I don't think it's easy to read her either, because she has the whole game, but she doesn't really do anything too often. So just a very fluid player, and I think she can beat Yastremska in 3. Yastremska's going to have points where she just crushes the ball and there's nothing Monero can do. Monero did get a little passive with the lead against Kenin too in the second set and had to play a tiebreaker, but just the level she's bringing right now, I think is more consistent than Yastremska. So, I think the Cinderella run is over there and Monero will win. Are we supposed to, just say it's over? Do I say goodbye? Are you still listening? Well, thanks. And I guess goodbye or something like that. Pretend I said something noble.